All right, so we're going to do some more practice problems with some advanced formulas in Excel. And we've got this document that we can download from our class files called Lesson 8.2 and 8.3 Intro. And so I've got this file opened up in Excel. I'm going to go through some of the functions that we can use in this unit. Now, first we're going to start off with what's called a VLOOKUP. That is a vertical lookup formula. What we're going to use it for in this case is we've got a grading scale or grading chart over here, and we do need to name this. So we're going to give that range a name. We don't need the headings in there, of course, so we're going to highlight the range, and we're going to just name it grade scale here for our purposes. It's just a little bit easier than having to enter a range in the formula. So what we want it to do is we want it to look at this and determine what letter grade each of these students has. So we're going to use the VLOOKUP to do that. That means it looks up the value in the first column of the range. So I'm going to come in here. You can, if you know what you're looking for, you can type it in. So I'll type in VLOOKUP here, and it should look for it, and then I can choose it. There we go. And then here are our function arguments for a VLOOKUP field. First up, it wants to know where is the value we're looking up. In this case, we're looking at Bob's grade. So we are looking up the value in F5, in his case, the 54. Then it wants to know the table array. So this would be the range where this table is. In our case, our range is this area here, which we've already named grade scale, or that was the goal, to name it something. Notice that you will see all of those numbers lit up. There's the 0, the F, the 60, the D, and so forth. So it's going to look up F5. It's going to look up the 54 in the grade scale. It's going to always look it up in column 1. Then it wants to know where do you want it to get the answer from? And this is going to be a number referring to which column in that range. So these letters are in column 2 of this range. Now, it wouldn't matter if this is all the way across the page over here. These two columns are next to each other, and this is the right side second column. So this is going to be 2. It tells you here as a preview, that's looking up M, and it's finding F. Now, this bottom one is actually one of those things that we can omit. Notice it says true is omitted. Now, this is really important in this type of a table, because what it does is it's going to look it up, and notice that 54 is not even in this table, right? 60 is, 0 is, but 54 is not. But I've listed them in such a way that we go high to low, or low to high here, 0 to 90. And so, therefore, if this says true here, or if we leave it blank, we omit it, it doesn't have to be an exact match. So it's going to go with the closest match that doesn't go over. In this case, it's looking at the 0 because the 54 doesn't hit the 60. If I was to type in false in here, which we wouldn't want to do on this case, we're going to have a problem. I'm just going to go ahead and click it. Notice that it says NA because there is no 54 over here. And so when you have false in here, you're looking for an exact match. Well, we're not. We just want an approximate match. That's the technical word, the approximate match. So I'm going to hit OK and leave that blank this time, and then we get our F. And then when we drag down, we get the rest of these, F, A, C, C, and B. And so that would be the correct one there. All right. Next, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate the HLOOKUP. HLOOKUP is identical to VLOOKUP, except instead of our chart being columns, it is horizontal rows. Okay, so that should be pretty good. Now, in this case, we do not want approximate matches because these were ranges, like 0 to 59 is an F, but here, Missouri, that's an absolute. We don't want it to be Mississippi and that's close enough, right? That wouldn't be good. So in the case here, what we're going to do is an HLOOKUP that's going to look up the value on the first row of our table and do something with the value on the second row. Because here we have funds available and we want to know what the grant funds available are going to be for that specific person in that state. Okay, so we've got kind of some different stuff going on here. Let's go ahead and pull up the HLOOKUP. Again, we can go search for it. you go. And then we have kind of the same story. So we have our lookup value here. That's going to be, what are we looking up? In this case, we are going to look up the state for Bob. That is age 16. We're going to look it up in our table. Now, I didn't make this one a table, but I wouldn't include state and grant rate in this table. I would just include this area. So you could have a range in here, or if you've named this ahead of time, you would use that defined name in your formula. And you can do it either way. All right, it's always going to match for the top column, or top row, and in the case of the VLOOKUP, the first column. And so we want to return the number in the bottom, right? So that's going to be row 2 in our selection of things, right? All right, so we've got that. Now, here is where we want a exact match. We want it to match only Missouri. So we are going to put false because we want an exact match. All right, so when we hit OK here, that returns kind of an odd number for what we're looking at. It just gives us this 30%. It's basically just giving us that number, and it's putting it into a decimal point. Well, that's because I've given you some instructions here that say to find out the grant funds available, we're going to take the funds available and multiply it times that rate. So we're not done with doing the math on this part. So we're going to come up to our formula, and we're going to take the answer of that, and we're going to multiply that answer by those funds available, which is I-16 in this case. We've got to do the math. If they're only going to get 30 cents, that's not going to make anybody happy, right? So we're going to take 30% of the available funds gives us the grant funds available. When I hit enter, then we get $1,500 because I've already formatted this range in accounting format. When we pull down, you should then see the remaining ones. Now, in the case here, because I didn't use a range that was named, I want you to see what's happening, okay? Notice that when I copy this down, okay, it's updating to the next row, so it's looking up Missouri, but it also changed this range and moved it down one. I'm going to hit escape and click on the next one. You can see what it does here. Aha, see, every single row is moving down on that table. So that's the benefit of naming the range first, because then it absolutely points to these cells. So you're probably thinking, well, what do I do about that now? Well, obviously we're going to have to edit the formula. We could do one of two things. We can make this table array here, an absolute function. We can certainly do that. That's a pretty common thing actually with these functions as well. So what you're going to do is you're going to put dollar signs around, and dollar signs just mean absolute value, around every single row and column in that little table range. So if I do that, now I'm getting an absolute value, meaning when I copy it down, anything with dollar signs stays the same. It won't update, it won't move down. So I'm going to click on here and do that. And then by and large, now we have the correct answers. And so that's what you should end up with. Now, like I said, you can either do the absolute value, which is good to understand, or you could have come in here and named this ahead of time. Let's say I'm going to name it state, just because that's an easy name to remember. Then I could have done this function differently, and instead of having that, oh yeah, I can't edit the function anymore because I added math onto the end of it. So I'll have to do this the old-fashioned way. So I'll double click here, and then in place of that table array, I can now just put the name of that table. Notice that turns red, so it is still looking at that state table. And then again, I can copy those down. I don't know why I keep right-clicking here. The answers are all identical, and now it's using state instead of that absolute range. But state is an absolute range, and that's why we have gotten in this chapter to defining names for ranges, because then you don't have to worry about that messing up. Okay, so this is kind of the first place where you should pause this video and you should go try to do this on your own in the exercise. And then come back and join me for the next part. All right, so the next one here is a nested if function. And the nested if function is, we've nested before other functions in an if, but this is an if within an if. So this gets a little bit complicated. With the if function here, what we're going to do is we're going to say there's multiple things that can happen. So this guy's 15. It says here, if you are below 15, you're too young for a license. So you can't even have a license. Okay. If you're between 16 and 45, you're going to pay a $30 fee to have a license. And if you're 46 and older, so if you're basically anything other than these things, you're going to have a $100 fee. So we do kind of have a value if false here. So if it's none of these, it's this. But we kind of have two different kinds of true values. And this is done a little bit differently than how we've done this in the past because we're using an embedded if. So I'm going to come in here and choose my if function. And then you have your logical test. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated. We have to evaluate this, and we've got to put in our if function. So the first thing is we have our first if function. We have a logical test here. So we're looking at this. We're looking at the first number, and we're determining if it's less than 16 because that's the first thing. If it's below 16, you're just too young for a license. So the value if true is too young, right? So far, that part should make sense to you because we've done things like this before. The problem is the value of false, we can't just go with one thing. We've got more. So in this case, we're going to have another if function as our value if false. So we have too young, but if it's false, we're going to fall back to another if function. We're going to say if, and then we're going to put that in again, that B29. And we're going to give the other side of this. So we're going to say the far side. So we already did this side. Now we're going to hit this side. So if it's false, if B29 is less than or equal to 45, okay, so less than or equal to 45, that's going to cover the middle range. Then what we're going to have is a $30 fee. So we put in 30. But if that doesn't happen, then our false is you're going to pay a $100 fee. So like all other options are going to be that $100 fee. Okay, so just let's talk through it one more time. So our logical test, we look at the age and we determine if it meets the first criteria. And it is easiest on these to start with the lowest number and work your way up, or start with your highest number and work your way down. But you've got to kind of put them in order as you're using them. So if B29 is less than 16 here, you're too young. Otherwise, we have another if function to determine on false. So looking at it, if B29 is less than or equal to 45, that hits our middle range, then we have a $30 fee. And if it's not that, then they're older than that, and that's going to be a $100 fee. And that should take care of that one. We'll fill that down. And sure enough, there we go. We've got one person who's too young. We have two $30 fees, a $100 fee, and another $30 fee. All right, that one's a little bit complicated. I always have to really think hard on these nested if functions. So this will conclude this video. So you'll want to stop this video, take a look at that on this part, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you the next section coming up next. All right, so here is part 2 of our Advanced Excel Formulas unit, which is Excel 8. And we're going to go over a couple of additional things. We're going to complete the rest of this worksheet, and we're going to do a couple of minor changes as well. Let's go ahead and pop back up here and take a look at this HLOOKUP table. Now, if you recall, we set this to be an exact match, which means you have to have typed in a state that's actually in this table. So if you type MS for Mississippi, an error would come up. Here, I'll do it on the bottom one just because it's easiest to remember to change. So instead of Illinois, let's say we typed in Indiana. Well, notice it's going to throw us an error because Indiana is not in this list of states. And that's because we set it to exact match. And how did we do that? Well, we set this to false. If you set it to true, it does what's called an approximate match, which means alphabetically Indiana is close to Illinois, so it went ahead and matched it anyway. Well, that would be very wrong on this one. So let me switch it back to false, meaning it has to be an exact match. Now, so what if somebody does type that in and this makes no sense to them because it's throwing an error? What you can do is you can modify a formula by adding what's called an if error function. It's basically a customized error message that better explains this. So since Indiana is not in the table, what we could do so that if anytime anybody types in one that's not in the table, we get an error that explains the error rather than just some random error. We put, instead of, right after the equal sign, instead of whatever the formula is, we leave this formula alone. It's going to stay there. But we're going to type in around it, if error, and you can type it in all caps. I just apparently had my caps lock on. And then your open parentheses. And then your value, of course, is all of this. And then comma. And then the value if there's an error. So if there's an error, what do we want it to say? And in this case, we'll just say state not eligible, because it's not one of those states that gets a grant for grant. State not eligible for grant. Okay. And so again, everything that was already there is in parentheses, and then a comma at the end, and then the error message. And you close the parentheses. It's really that simple. And then when you hit enter here, since we have Indiana in there, it's going to say Indiana is not a state that's eligible. We type Illinois in, Illinois is eligible. We type Alaska in, Alaska's not eligible. Okay, so try that out for size and see if you can get that to work. And then let's just change that from Illinois to Indiana so that you can test that out. Another thing that's going to be mentioned in this chapter of the book is using conditional formatting. Now, we've used conditional formatting before for various things. They're going to do it for basically for checking data redundancy. Now, with names, we could have multiple Bobs, Lucys, and Maxes. It wouldn't matter. But let's say that we had IDs in this field, like state ID numbers or your driver's license number, social security number, something like that was in this field. And so let's say all this entire range is going to get that. Well, what conditional formatting that they're going to talk about is how to highlight cells that contain duplicate values. So that if we've already got somebody in a table and then we go to enter them again, it's going to let us know that by highlighting those duplicate values, which is really useful in a long table. If you have 1,000 things in there and you don't realize that person's already a customer in there, that would be a problem. So remember when we did access, we could set it so that something couldn't have duplicate values. So this is kind of like doing that, but in Excel. So under conditional formatting, I'm going to go to duplicate values. And it just says format cells that contain a duplicate with just light red with dark red. We'll say that's fine. So right now there's no duplicates in here. But if I come into one of these cells and I type Bob again, notice now both my Bobs light up. So now I can look and see, oh, okay, well, Bob's already in there, so that's not good. I probably need to take him out. Or, you know, this wouldn't happen with the name Bob, but it would happen with an ID number or something that was in there twice. So it's really a nice little tool in there. Now, if you need to manage those rules, under condition formatting is manage rules. If you need to make a change to a rule, you would go to manage rules. You don't go set the rule again. That would set a whole nother rule. So this is your conditional formatting rules manager. This tells you that that range, that G16 to G23, is set to look for those duplicate values. If you wanted to change that, maybe you don't like it being red with red, you can click on edit rule. And then you can choose the format for that rule. So you can be like, yeah, I don't like red with red. I want, and then, you know, pick your colors or whatever here. So maybe I want it to have, yellow would look dumb. Let's just say black on red. So there's the font color. Your fill would be here. Your fonts, your bold, italic, whatever. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I've changed the rule. And when you hit OK, that rule will then be modified. So now I don't have red letters, I have black letters. Okay, so give that a shot and then, you know, type in an extra one in there to see if it works. I'm going to go ahead and type in Judy also, and then you can see Judy's going to light up. So that's conditional formatting and utilizing manage rules to fix a conditional formatting problem in case you have it formatted incorrectly or you don't like the way it looks. All right, let's come down to the last little bit here. You'll find this one's pretty simple. We're going to do count if and sum if, but I will just mention there is also an average if. And There are also sum ifs and count ifs. That's right, with S's on the end of them. And as you might guess, the ones with plural are going to have multiple criteria. So that's how they'll work differently. You'd be able to figure it out if you went into the little function wizard box anyway. But here's what this does. So we can use a count if statement to count something if it meets a criteria. So for instance, we can say in this range, count how many of the people are males, or count them if the gender is equal to M, right? So in here, we can either type it in or we'll click the thing. I'll go ahead and click it. Count if is the one I'm going to do. And we're going to count it if, and then the range. So the range would be right here where these are, B8 to B42. Again, if you're going to be using ranges like this, sometimes it's a good idea to go ahead and name that range so it's absolute, because otherwise you may have to go in there and put in all those dollar signs just to be on the safe side to make sure it doesn't accidentally move around. If we were to copy the formula, we wouldn't necessarily need to copy this formula, but we are going to, because we're going to make a copy of this formula and just change the value. So the criteria is that it has to equal M. Now, the way this works is you can either put the M in quotation marks, or you can put the operator with the M in quotation marks. So the operator in this case would be an equal sign. It equals M. But the equal sign is optional. You don't actually have to put in equal sign. But if you were doing like greater than or less than, you would need quotation marks in this type of a formula. So we hit OK, and it tells us there are 2 males. Now, because I made this an absolute value, I can copy this down. If I would not have made this an absolute value, it wouldn't work right. Okay? So if ahead of time you name this gender over here, and then when you get ready to type in this formula, you put gender in that first box, then it's going to work fine too. But in this case, I'm going to pull it down. Of course, it's still looking for males, so I'm going to double click and edit this formula and set it to equal females. And then we should be good to go there, and it's counted our females. Okay? The number who love, and then we have a value in here, blue. So favorite color here, we have all those listed here. So this time I'm going to go ahead and name my structured range. So I'll just call it colors. And then number who love that color blue. So I'm going to go in here and do another count if. My range, well, I've already named it, color. Did I name it color or colors? I don't remember. Colors. Okay, good. Colors. And the criteria here, this time our criteria is going to be equal to whatever's in this box. So in this case, it's H41. Now, this should be an absolute value because we forever want to point to that box. So again, you would put those dollar signs around the column and row so that that always points to that one box. Not that we're going to copy this formula, but we do want to just kind of get in the habit of that. So we go there, and indeed, we have one person who likes blue. Now, if I'm going to go in here and change this to red and hit enter, it should update, and indeed it does. Great. So we have 3. All right, last one here. Same situation. We're counting them if they meet a criteria, and in this case, the criteria is selling over 5 items. So again, we could go ahead and set this range and call it whatever, sold items or something like that. In my case, I didn't do that, so I'm just going to select the area. Again, probably it would be a good idea to go ahead and make it an absolute value just to be on the safe side. And then you set your criteria. In this case, over 5 would be greater than 5. And you want to make sure you press tab and let it put those quotation marks on there for you. Or if you're typing it in manually, you'll put those in. I sometimes like to use the box on these because sometimes I forget whether or not I need the quotation marks. And of course, if you're using this box, it's going to add them for you if it's needed. I'm going to hit OK. And sure enough, we have how many sold over 5? We have 2, the 8 and the 10. So we're good to go. This next one works similarly. So sum if does the same thing. It's going to add up the numbers if, of course, they do what they're supposed to do. In this case here, total sales by grade. So we're going to we're going to sum the sales if they're 11th graders. So this works just like count if. And like I said, there's one called average if too that you'll use. I'm going to look for sum if. Oops, just the sum if, not the ifs. Again, the ifs just has additional criteria. You can see there's just more criteria boxes in there. See. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK for SUMIF. Again, my range here, and we're talking about total sales, so your range is going to be where your sales are. And again, probably you should make that absolute. I'm not going to take the time right now for you to watch me do that. The criteria here is we're pointing to this box. We will always point to that box, so I will indeed make that one an absolute reference because it's a special box. And then it says, what's the sum range? So, well, let's back up here. My range to evaluate for 11th graders is not the same as my sum range. So this is wrong. What I'm saying here, which was wrong, is look at these numbers and find the 11th graders. Well, it can't look at those numbers, right, because those are sales. So, fail on my part there. The range would actually be here where the grades are. Okay, and then the sum range is after I look at these and I pull out the 11th graders, then what? And in this case, I want them to sum something, which is their sales. And so the sum range is going to be that range where those numbers are that we want them to add up. And there you go. And in your book, when you work through the chapter, they'll usually have these saved already as structured ranges, so you won't be having to deal with, you know, alphabetical and numeric ranges. All right, the final one here is total sales by the males. So again, situation is going to be a sum if because we're going to be totaling something, we're summing it. The range, again, we're looking at sales by male, so our criteria is going to be male. So our criteria range will then be the gender. The criteria will be male, and we don't have like a box where we pick that. So in this case, we would set whatever that is, and in this case, it's an M. Oops, M. And then the sum range, where are the sales that we're going to sum up? And there you go. And again, you could have used M or you could have said equals M. They have the same result. It doesn't matter which one that you use. So there you go. That is lesson 8.2 and 8.3 between these two videos. And hopefully that helps you to understand. And when you work through your chapter, you should find it to just be a breeze. So good luck.